How do societies respond when government fails to meet their needs? I think we had this on the back of our chart yesterday. Well, in the Middle Ages, it's feudalism, okay? Which, I'll put that up there again, I'll give you a second. Feudalism is their answer during this time period. Why was there a need? No one was in control. Why did they turn to this system? Why would people become serfs and live in villages and be under the authority of the lords? Protection. Yeah, protection. That was part of the trade-off. Okay? So when we don't have our needs met, when there's no government, something's going to develop, and this is what develops out of the chaos. But you know, this is what they had to deal with. It's a chaotic situation, and this is the best system they could come up with. Okay? Now, feudalism, as we talked about yesterday, who really has the power in the feudal system? Hey, the king. But what did I say about kings early on in Europe? Were there many kings? No. I mean, what? They mentioned Alfred the Great. But when you think of a king, don't you think of these huge palaces and castles? And early on, it just wasn't that. They mentioned a guy named Charlemagne, who literally unifies Europe around 800 AD for a small period of time. But when he dies, his predecessor, or his sons and grandsons really can't keep things together. So it sort of falls back apart. So real kings like you guys think of probably don't come about in Europe until about 1200, 1300. So really it's a king / lord that really has the power. Okay? So number 2, it does say the king ruled the country. Once again, don't think countries like we think of today. He divided the land among important men called, here. What? No. Number 3? Nobles, okay? And nobles, that's a term that you hear all the time in history. They're the ones with the land, basically. They're the wealthy landowners, is a simple way to think of them. In exchange for the land, the nobles paid, and we didn't use this term. Anyone get it?
Homage.
Number 4?
Homage.
Okay, homage, okay? That's okay. You just gave the French pronunciation, I guess. But homage. Basically, they took an oath of loyalty because guess what? The king or the lord above you had given you land, okay, in exchange for your protection. These nobles were called, Marissa, what were the nobles called? We mentioned this term yesterday. No pressure. Okay, if I'm the Lord and I give you land,
Well, it's the vassal.
the vassal, yeah, vassals. Now let me ask you this: if Marissa has this chunk of land and she splits it up amongst other nobles, they become her vassals. Okay, so it's sort of like a debtor, someone that owes you a favor, so to speak. Let's see, and they swore to serve, protect, fight for him. The lords were also granted land called, what was that piece of land called? We called it a fief. The term they used on this was a manor, but the fief was, basically it was your little fiefdom, like a kingdom. Where the king had his kingdom, the nobles had their little fiefdom. Okay, and that gets to number 7. All these estates were included. They used the word fiefdom for the king, and I know this may be splitting hairs, but the king's land would be his kingdom, okay? Whereas the nobles, they got their fief, that would be their fiefdom. So if you put fiefdom for number 7, that's fine, but probably the better term would be kingdom. Now, this is what we're going to look at next. In this society that they set up, because, and you don't have to write this down, this was political. Was it a democracy? No. Okay. It was social, and it was also economic. Now, the economic side is known as manorialism. Guess where that word came from? You remember that video clip I showed you yesterday with Craddock? The peasant and the serfs and the lord of the manor and all that? That was their economy. It wasn't this global economy where you were getting stuff, you know, where your kids were wearing clothes made in China and India. It was just their little economy in that village. Okay, we'll talk more about that later on. Okay, but it also set up the social structure, and that's what we'll look at next. Number 8, priest. Another word for priest would be what? The clergy. Some people were not serfs, and they weren't bound to the land. They were known as what? Okay, number 9. Freemen. So there were some people that weren't nobles, they weren't serfs, and they could own small plots of land and move around freely. Number 10, most people were what? Peasants. Worked as farmers, builders, craftsmen. And then, of course, there were a lot of people that were peasants, but they were tied to the land. They were called the serfs. In the feudal system, each class owed loyalty and service to the class above it. So there's a connection between the classes. Except for the church leaders, every man was trained to fight. Warriors of the noble class were known as what? Knights. Now, the rest of it, it's not really that important that you know it for a test, but let's just fill in. Number 13, a boy who wanted to become a knight began training as a page at age 7, which we still have pages today, but they're people that maybe serve in the U.S. Congress or the North Carolina legislature, sort of help out the legislators. You can be a congressional page in D.C. At age 14, a boy became a squire. You may have heard that term before. And if he served well, he was knighted at the age of 21 by a nobleman. And guys, do people still get knighted today? Yeah. Now, do we do that in the United States?
No.
No. Does anyone know why?
We don't have it.
Close. Okay, well, there's part of our written plan of government for the whole country. What's that called? What's our written plan? The Constitution? In the Constitution, it says that Congress cannot grant titles of nobility. Now, can you imagine why the Founding Fathers put that in the Constitution? Because the English, right? And what's it suggest? I mean, what did we just say? The people that were above you in this society were technically, I mean, you had to answer to them. And we don't believe in these nobles, so to speak. So we put that in our Constitution. Now, it's still a tradition in other parts of the world. If you follow soccer, you ever heard of Sir Alex Ferguson? Okay, I don't know if he still manages Manchester United. I think he stepped down. But Sir Alex Ferguson, he was knighted. Okay, you ever heard of Sir Anthony Hopkins? He's a famous actor. Okay, I think Elton John is a famous musician. I think he's actually been knighted. The British like to do that a lot. And it's more traditional now, but think about it. Don't they still have a queen and princes? And yeah. So, yeah, that's part of their culture. Okay, not so much here. So, this is the system. What we have on the back is sort of the social side of it. I mean, politically, I think we understand lords and kings rule the day. Okay? Economically, we will come back to that part of the system. But let's look at society during this time.
This is slaves still, unskilled workers. Yeah, workers. Workers, I think. Underclass people. Because they can't get a job. Yeah.
Actually, Jackie, I don't think y'all can even run a mile.
Actually, I can run a line.
Because you can't make the team if you can't run out under 3 minutes.
What that,
We don't find it.
what that.
Say 2 minutes behind them. In each side, it takes 2 minutes. It takes me 2 minutes. So the king or the leader.
The king or the president. Or no.
What do these three illustrations represent? Social classes. Anyone use a different word or term? Okay, let's not use caste system because that's specific to India. Now that is a form of class structure. Okay?
It's like the social status.
Social status.
Yeah, we didn't write that in.
If you didn't write social class system, a class system would be fine, but you need to know this term. That's one of those test words that if you don't know, I mean, when you think of hierarchy, you need to think of, images like this, people that are higher ups, okay? Social hierarchy or class system or class structure. Number 2, how are the ancient Egypt and Middle Ages illustrations similar? Okay, they have what, a king at the top? Now, of course, one's the pharaoh, the other's king or queen. What was another similarity?
Triangle.
What?
Triangle. They're both triangles. Oh.
Okay, that's true. Can't argue with that.
Wait,
but
what did he say?
he said they're both triangles. But let's think about it. Why are they that shape?
More people. That's minority.
Yeah, there are a lot more people at the bottom than at the top. Has that changed from 4,000 years ago to current day? Not really.
Change the shape.
Okay.
Religion is
Okay, hold on, guys, come on. What now?
like the priest and the church is high up in the tree.
Okay, so in both, you have a king at the top. In both cases, you could say this several different ways. Religious figures are near the top. Okay? And then what about at the bottom? What? Peasants tend to be at the bottom. You could have said something to the effect that most people are in the bottom third of their societies. How are all three illustrations the same? We've already mentioned it once. Yeah, most people are at the bottom. Okay? And in a roundabout way, yeah, it is sort of based on wealth. I mean, let me ask you this, in these two, how do you think you got wealth? How did you get power? Born into it and by the sword, right? I mean, nowadays, not so much the sword. Okay? You could have said there's a small number at the top. Okay, that would be a fair answer as well. Number 5, in each society, who has the most power in the government? Yeah. How many of you put wealth, people with the money? Okay. If you put the kings for like Egypt and the Middle Ages, that's fine. And then in our society, it's what? You could have put wealth, money. I mean, once again, do I have a good chance, Aubrey? Do I have a good chance of having a one-on-one with President Obama versus Bill Gates versus Warren Buffett? Hey, my name's Todd Plummer. I teach at Glenn High School in Kernersville. I'm a 9th grade world history teacher, and today's focus was on power and authority during the Middle Ages.
And what do you think worked about the lesson?
Well, today's lesson, we covered a lot of information we were able to review. I did get the kids to pair up. They had to take notes, but we have a lot of stuff we have to cover because we're behind this semester, so I felt good about the amount of information covered. We didn't quite meet all of my goals today because we didn't get to the two final questions in detail, which we'll have to do that Monday.
And what standards were you teaching?
We were focusing on objectives 3.1 and 3.2. Really, 3.1 deals with the idea of authority, and when you don't have a strong government, someone's going to fill that void and step into power. And in the case of Europe during the Middle Ages, you have the Catholic Church, which steps in. But at the same time, you have this feudal system and your feudal lords that develop, and the conflict between those two help us address the next standard, which is 3.2, and it asks us to look at the struggle between religious and secular powers, which in this case ties in perfectly because you have the Catholic Church that stepped in because there was a power void, and then you have these feudal lords, nobles, kings that have power, and the conflict between the two is a big theme during the Middle Ages.